Hello, everyone, my fellow musicologists, metal aficionados. I'm Alex Tamulus. Welcome to the channel. We're going to keep on discussing the artwork. We can parallel so much about the cover itself with the rock and metal culture, the artistic themes related to fantasy, mystery, fables, lore, the album artworks of the past. For me, that's pretty rad. I love to read about rock, metal, whether, religious, philosophical themes, and the art related to it is very appealing as well. Blasphemy basically has been, fodder for the content, the lyrical content for ages. Many albums of the past have religious themes on them. It's part of the evolution of the heavy metal, especially the new wave of British heavy metal. The artwork for Load falls under the same umbrella. Lars has been into art. Has been into collecting art, appreciating various painters. He's Danish. He's been raised with that artistic sensibility, and at the same time, he appreciates art that's anti-authoritarian, art that goes against the system, against the machine, pun intended. Rebellion in art and rebellion in music. A way to express yourself through sound and through visuals. It's the corrosion of conformity. It's like the lyrics in Dyer's Eve. I think for me, that's what James sings. The crux here is that metal needs to be in touch with the occult and the sacred and the elevated, since it needs to break from the typical tradition and the practice and regulations and legislations and whatnot, fighting against what's, the norm. Does that mean that all metal does that? Of course not. But a huge portion of the bands that are loved and adored by most people, from the 70s or the 80s, these bands, they are sons of the occult rock, the heavy metal, the early metal, proto-metal from the late 60s to the early 70s, evolving to the 80s. So I'm going to present some evidence to these claims here. Check out some of the covers from the past from really famous bands. Coven, their first album, it's called Witchcraft Destroys Minds and Reaps Souls. You have a skull, a crucifix, the album title. The first song on the album is called Black Sabbath, which is really cool. So let's go to 1970. July 13th, self-eponymous album of Black Sabbath. It looks spooky, scary, with the iconic Lady Sabbath. And I bet it was a very rebellious statement back then. A shocker. Let's look at On Your Feet and On Your Knees by Blue Oyster Cult. These guys are all from the early 70s. They were highly influential. Then we have the new wave of British heavy metal. Saxon, Venom, Raven, and then a couple years later, you have bands like Angel Witch, Iron Maiden, Metallica, Sepultura, Motorhead, Judas Priest, Merciful Fate, Danzig. We can just keep going, right? Ghost, Blood Ceremony, Mastodon, Catatonia, Opeth, Behemoth, Tool, Disturbed, Marilyn Manson, Korn, Slipknot, from all genres of rock. And we can even analyze artists that are not linked to the occult. For example, let's say Whitesnake, their Saints and Sinners album, or even Black Sabbath, Heaven and Hell. Even out of rock, looking at synthwave, for example, there's a very cool artist. His name is Carpenter Brut. He's French, so Carpenter Brut. And he's very influenced by John Carpenter, by the horror visuals. And the visuals are so captivating. And the main focus here is to show you that the whole situation with Andres Serrano, when it came to time for Lars and the band to pick the cover, it justifies. It is justified due to the fact that metal is linked to intense artwork. And Lars, as an art collector, as someone who's very keen on aesthetics, as you got to see with his painting one of the most famous ones from Jean-Michel Basquiat, on some kind of monster, right? It's a beautiful painting. It's called Prophet One. It's got a mix of urban graffiti. You have that heroic character there with a crown of thorns. It's a self-portrait of Jean-Michel Basquiat, and it's got really interesting aspects. The neat play on words, prophet and prophet. So Basquiat is seen as the prophet of the street, but he still shows some dislike to commercialism, to society and money, which is represented by the numbers. The torture of that soul, the skeletal figure, very skinny figure with two hands up. He's out of his mind, very troubled by the dichotomy, the dilemma that he finds himself in. And the same approach is valid for Metallica. Lars really liked that abstract art, that stuff there. And we can even go back to Kill 'Em All, for example, and trying to shock everyone with gore, blood, violence. You bump into the record there, it's not Billy Joel. The cover is just screaming for the themes that the band conveys with their music. Ride the Lightning, Master of Puppets, they are, these beautiful drawings by an idea that came with Kirk Hammett for a ride, an obsession with, horror stories, comic books. He was reading a book by Stephen King. It's called The Stand. And the title, Ride the Lightning, came as a reference to someone who's going to go to the electric chair. When you're ready to listen, you just sit on the chair here and ride the lightning with us. Just experience these powerful tunes for 45 minutes. It was spot on. With Master of Puppets, probably one of the most iconic covers of all time, encapsulating the idea of manipulation, the idea of drugs, like manipulated by drugs, by war, by politics, by whatever it is. You have your puppeteer there. You're controlled by various sectors of society. Even when you say you're not, you're still controlled by your impulses, by your needs. So the cover was perfect for what it wanted to convey anyway. Off to Justice. Metallica wanted to be away from the occult, from horror, from gore, from the cartoonish, from the pillars of new wave of British heavy metal. And they tackled more political themes, injustice, a broken system. The cover depicts that, I mean, the cracked statue bound by those ropes, with the scales that are tipping, overflowing with dollar bills. The themes of the ropes, coming back from Master of Puppets, showing now that justice is under the manipulation from the ones who have that profit agenda. But there's an element of hope there. You see the sword. We can picture a scenario where she can cut the ropes, she can remove the blindfold, and then she's going to save the day. But that's not the scenario that's depicted on the album. The album is a very realistic one, and it's in tandem with the artwork. Off to the Black Album. Some might say that snake there could mean, something related to the Garden of Eden, but it's actually a coiled rattlesnake. If you put your foot down on me, I'll strike back. I'm ready to take on the world, kind of thing. It can be a sign, and it is a sign of national pride, of individual freedom, of your rights, the protection of your rights, the darkness of the themes, the darkness of the lyrics. It also works beautifully. Then we get to 1995, 96, and the need for a new Metallica album, something that could encapsulate the themes of the songs and the current status of the Metallica camp, remembering that Lars is a huge collector. He loves art that shocks, that provokes. Nothing better than having a controversial artwork, the photograph on the cover. Besides, they were dealing with many themes related to blood, as in family, birth, death, vices, addiction, all that stuff. So they wanted people to really be provoked and to think about the cover, to look up the artist later maybe, to know more info. And people responded to the work, obviously, in various ways. Lars told Kerrang! Magazine, he said, quote, "These covers will always hold a special place in my heart. I love those amazing pieces by Andres Serrano. I love the imagery." Lars was very familiar with the 1987 work by Andres called Piss Christ. That's when he achieved global infamy, submerging a crucifix in a tank of plexiglass full of his own urine. That shocked the art world, the contemporary art world. It is indeed linked to infamy, to rebellion, to being different, being able to provoke people, with weird stuff like bodily fluids. I'm actually going to share with you an interview from Andres Serrano, and you get to understand, in my opinion, his perspective first and foremost.
Artists and creators like myself, it gives us the right to do what we feel we need to do. But always saw myself as an artist rather than as a photographer. And I still see myself as a conceptual artist with a camera. And so I think outside the box.
He was very clear on individual artistic expression and that people can interpret art however they want it. So while his images may evoke strong reactions, his subject matter remains elementally human. Whether he's depicting religious icons, depicting objects of violence or bodily fluids, just think about it. Think about the meaning of these pieces. The fluids, they carry both productive and destructive power. Each can produce life through transfusions, through the conception, of a being, or they can hasten death by their toxicity. So the image is linked to the cycle of life and death. It is religious symbolism, and the lyrics on Load are full of religious symbolism. Capital sins, redemption, regret, you name it, violence, sex, as I've mentioned before in my other videos. But at the same time, the music and the visuals, they have that deviant, that outlaw character, the controversy, they're emotionally provocative, and they polarize people. But they always, it always makes us think. And as long as we're able to debate and to think, to bring things for discussion, we are on the right track. That's it for me today, guys. I'm signing out. And as always, music is what music does. We are the ones who can keep music alive by working together as a community. So please make sure that you like the video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, for future videos on music, bass covers, music and society, music and philosophy, heavy metal and rock trivia, and so much more.